Hello everyone and welcome back. This video is about Giovanni's Room, which is the second novel written by the amazing James Baldwin. This novel was published in 1956, 3 years after the publication of the earlier first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain. Giovanni's Room is about an American young man, and it is written through the perspective of that young man who is named David. He's a white young man who has moved from New York to Paris, France. In Paris, he's supposed to be, although at the time they're not together, at the time that we find them, he is romantically with a young lady named Hella. And Hella is at the time, for a time, she's away in Spain, traveling, but they are together, boyfriend, girlfriend, transitioning into being an engaged couple. But David is secretly, somewhat secretly, depending on which other secondary character's perspective you focus on. But officially, it is a secret that he is gay. Maybe bisexual, but I imagine him to be gay. And so Giovanni, from the moment that they meet, Giovanni becomes David's center of attention. His center of erotic attention, affection, love, and inner conflict. So there's an inner conflict. And that inner conflict is experienced, lived through by David. And there's so many polarities through which you can express that conflict and symbolize even. You can symbolize the conflict. There is that polarity between Europe and North America, New York, Paris. There's a polarity between David's biological father, his actual literal father, and the later father figures that he finds in Paris, namely one notable character whose name is Jacques. Jacques gives him a lot of advice, fatherly, father-like perspective on his life, on life in general. But there's also a polarity between David's father and mother, the absent mother, the father and aunt, who's another character who's pulling him. He meets a landlady, and the landlady gives voice to this other major force, which is the norms and standards, values of society. So that in that polarity, we have the norms and values of society, how you're supposed to live, your life, organize your life. And on the other hand, the intimate, private, individual elements of your life that you can use as material to construct your own narrative. So there are more hidden private sides, more intimate things that you personally, or our character more personally relates to. They are real to him in a different way. And Giovanni represents that, the relationship with Giovanni. That relationship, it's important to note, one thing that makes, one of the many things that makes rereading this novel enjoyable is the kinds of foreshadowing and how many different angles Baldwin takes, how many different ways he uses inspecting this story, inspecting this conflict. He foreshadows the whole story through an earlier relationship between David and Joey. So David and Joey were teenagers when they meet, and they have this brief, romantic, erotic, homoerotic encounter together. And something happens between them, and that becomes the structure, a more miniature version, a less developed, less dramatic, less tragic version of the story that we later read about, the relationship between David and Giovanni. It is foretold and foreshadowed through an earlier relationship. So that could count as a kind of spoiler, but even that, you don't need that as a spoiler, because Baldwin tells you what happens at the very beginning of the book. This is admirable because he's not one of those idea-driven writers who has an idea and like withholding some information from you. We recently read with my reading group, Clara and the Sun. We are still in the process of discussing it. Ishiguro is one useful contrast here. Ishiguro is primarily an idea-driven, idea-centered writer. He has an idea, he has a structure, and he is an architect of that. And if you know all of that structure, if you know all of the ideas, all of the narratives in advance, you don't really need to read the novel. You don't get much more from the novel because the novel is just an unfolding of those ideas. But if you know everything about the story, if you know the entire summary of Baldwin's Giovanni's Room, you will still have a lot. You have everything to get by actual reading, by actually engaging with the material of the novel, the text. Baldwin, like other great writers like Kundera, Kafka, he's doing something with language. He's doing something with text, with the actual concrete material. Anyways, I've lost my train of thought, but that's okay. One of the main things that I wanted to touch on that we read about in Giovanni's Room, that to me is really the central thing. And that is the reason why the novel remains relevant in our time. It is completely relevant. If you think that just because homosexuality is now accepted, at least in the Western world, it is accepted as a form of life, a form of love, a lifestyle, because it is accepted, a book like Giovanni's Room is not as relevant to us, or another book similar, comparable in my mind. The Beautiful Room is Empty. These books are not as relevant for us. That's completely wrong, incorrect. Because the conflict that we are reading about, David's conflict at its heart, is a conflict between the dominant narratives, the stories that you're supposed to live, comfortable stories. If you go into those stories that society norms have given us, we have been provided with these models. If we get into them, embody them, we get stability, comfort. We also get respect and esteem. We might get prestige from society because society recognizes us. But if we go our own way, if we go our individual way and diverge in ways that the society doesn't recognize, doesn't esteem, maybe frowns upon, then we are in trouble. We are in trouble in several different ways. We have a lot more work to do because those stories are not already pre-packaged. We have to construct them. And we don't get much back by way of respect, esteem, prestige. But what we get is integrity, individuation, self-respect, not having deceived and deluded ourselves. Those are the rewards of living a kind of more integral life. Anyways, what I wanted to say, what I admire, one of the things that I admire in this novel is how it shows that the relationship between the dominant narratives about our lives and hidden narratives can involve cruelty. If somebody or if a relationship that we have belongs only in our hidden narrative, we might be very cruel to that relationship. We might be very cruel to that person who doesn't neatly belong in our dominant, societally acceptable narratives. We'll be very cruel, very disrespectful of the humanity and dignity, personhood of this person who we do have a relationship. It might be a very loving relationship, but because it doesn't fit into the norms, we apply cruelty to the person, to the relationship, and to that part of ourselves that is attached to that. So at this point, I need to cut and go into the Patreon only version of this video because I want to share something personal. Hello again to the viewers on the YouTube channel. So I was talking about the separation between the dominant narrative and the hidden narrative, and how if an element or person or relationship is in that hidden narrative, we might apply an incredible amount of cruelty to that. And that is David's cruelty directed at Giovanni. That is the tragedy of their life. And it's also a cruelty that David applies to himself, to his own bond, his own attachment, to who he really is. There is a truth, there's a beautiful truth in the moment where David and Giovanni meet. It is a beautiful encounter, and you can feel that the whole scene feels that encounter and celebrates it. Everybody feels that joy. It is such a contagious joy of those two characters meeting, clicking so naturally, so effortlessly. Giovanni's initial flirtation, charm. His very powerful charm. He shows up very powerful, very effective, and very open and powerful in a way that Deleuze and Spinoza talk about power. Power not just to effect change, but also to be changed, to be transformed. That is the kind of love that Baldwin is advocating, defending, going for a love that is risky, that runs the risk of changing us, transforming us, moving us, shaking our life. And that really being faithful to that requires merging together the different threads, narrative threads of our lives and trying to reconcile them. And that would be the path of individuation if we take that path. Anyways, that's it. That's it for now. Thank you for staying until this point. I hope that you're all doing well. If you haven't read this book, please read it if you like to read about this love story, this sad, tragic, very gently told in a very gentle, soft, light tone. And till next time.